From the Times and the Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana. For Nigel Farage, the anti-politician politician, 2026 was shaping up to be a year of surging poll ratings and gathering momentum. But now, he's hit a glitch.
I've got to ask you a question about this £5 million gift from this crypto billionaire. I'm getting comments as you and I are speaking. This man needs to tell us, what has he done with the £5 million? Get him to be truthful. Nigel Farage, please, what has happened to this £5 million gift?
With all due respect, what's it got to do with you?
Since the news broke of the £5 million gift, Farage has appeared flustered and at times furious with the growing media scrutiny.
Let's be clear. It's an unconditional gift. I can spend it on cars if I want to. It's entirely up to me, right?
So, Mr. Farage, how much of that money have you spent?
Look, it's literally none of your business.
And the revelations about his personal finances didn't stop there. Earlier this week, there was the news of his lucrative role with a gold bullion company.
I've got to tell you, I'm very impressed with this company, and I'm very pleased and proud to put my name to it.
And then...
The Times is reporting how Nigel Farage has built a £4 million portfolio alongside his partner Laura Ferrari in the past decade.
He declared in 2017 that he was skint. That's the word he used. Now, from then, he's gone to being skint to having 5 properties, 4 of them bought with cash. Now, how did he manage that?
And it's not just the media who are asking questions. The MP for Clacton and leader of the Reform Party has stirred up a storm in Parliament.
The member for Clacton has apparently raked in £2 million over his past 2 years of service as a member of Parliament. Just yesterday, as we heard, £270,000 for 12 hours of work. It is frankly obscene.
What exactly do we know about Nigel Farage's finances? Do his millions undermine his man-of-the-people image? And could this prove to be his political Achilles heel? The story today. Will Farage's finances lead to his downfall?
When I was a very young journalist at The Spectator magazine, I started following UKIP in about 2011, 2012, now at which point the party had been going for almost 2 decades. But that was a moment when they were starting to get real traction.
Times columnist and leader writer Sebastian Payne has also been a Farage watcher of some repute for a decade and a half.
Partly because the Conservative Party was very exercised about the EU issue long before the word Brexit came into the lexicon, but also because I could see something was happening, and it was very much on the Kent and Essex coasts, where you had a lot of communities that felt economically deprived, they felt abandoned by mainstream politics, and Nigel Farage appealed to them in a way. And I can remember when I interviewed him, he said to me, you tell UKIP members because they had their bomber command ties on from the Second World War. So that was very much the vintage of those people. So I spent endless days and weeks down on the Kent and Essex coast when Nigel Farage was starting to make headway, particularly in the 2014 European elections, then of course with his bid in 2015 to become the MP for Thanet South, which did not work.
And that was with an earlier guise of his political parties. That was with UKIP, one of the longest running. As somebody who's watched him up close, you know, he has a reputation for being a great political operator, for being great with people, a great speech maker, charismatic. I mean, just describe his style from what you've seen.
Back in those days, he really brought back the town hall political meeting where people had given up on this a long time ago. I think it was Tony Benn who said that Britain used to be a nation of town hall political speeches, now it's a nation of book festival goers. And Nigel Farage brought back the thing where he would get anything from tens to hundreds of people to come out on a Friday evening and hear his rabble-rousing speech. And I think particularly in that era, when politicians were seen as maybe a bit identikit, seen as very metropolitan, metropolitan, he came across in a way that was authentic. Now, of course, like all politicians, it is still a shtick, right? In the same way that Andy Burnham has his shtick as being Mr. Manchester, Farage had his shtick as the pub-going, beer-swelling, smoking man of the people. But I think there's also another side to Nigel Farage as well, which you've seen when you've spent enough time around him, which is that he's very thin-skinned and he's very tetchy. And I first really saw that in the Thanet South campaign, when it looked as if he was going to break with the past and actually become a Member of Parliament for UKIP. And he didn't win that, and the Conservatives won that seat, the candidate called Craig McKinley, who's now in the House of Lords. And in the final days of those campaign, he was very angry, very tetchy with his staff, very frustrated. They could feel the campaign was going away from him, and that contrasts with the jovial side that a lot of people will see when they see him out and about on the media.
You're so right. He is definitely tetchier than most politicians. I remember doing an interview with him years ago, and he clearly got very annoyed, threw off his microphone and stormed off down the stairs in Millbank, and I remember having to run after him. But that sort of became almost his trademark. He is very tetchy when he's criticised.
And he would say it's pugilistic against the establishment. And he would say that there are people, journalists, the mainstream media, as he would call it, that are out to get him. And he is therefore pushing back against that. And when you're in an era where journalists are not that well trusted or liked by the public, it does kind of work for him.
As you say, he was the man of the people who you would have a pint with in the pub, but he was also somebody who was known as a city trader. He had his background as a sort of city white boy done good. He'd made his money, or that was certainly the image he gave. Wore tweed a lot, sort of seemed to be comfortable in city crowds as well as with ordinary people. And yet, in 2017, after he's had his Brexit success, he does make a rather unexpected announcement. Take us back to that moment.
So the Brexit referendum was a very odd moment for Nigel Farage, because obviously this is what he'd spent his whole life campaigning for. But in the campaign itself, he was sidelined and he was not actually a part of the main Brexit campaign. And of course, UKIP had failed in terms of the 2015 election. So he announced he was leaving mainstream politics, and he essentially, with his wilderness years in a way, he wasn't really doing that much. But in 2017, he basically said he was 53, he was single, and he was skint.
53, separated, skint. Yeah, great.
Why are you skint?
Well, I've got 20 years of doing this.
And even though he'd had that city career, Nigel Farage had said he basically had given up a lot of prospective wealth to focus on politics. And at that moment, there was not that much going on for him. He was not involved in Parliament. He was not involved in the Brexit debate. And he was so just a UKIP MEP at that point.
I mean, he was still a well-paid MEP with expenses and presenting gigs. But he, as far as he was concerned, was skint. Things have certainly changed. Just describe the financial journey he's been on since.
So the sort of second coming of Nigel Farage starts in about 2020, and you can link that with the launching of GB News, the rolling news channel, where Nigel Farage became its star presenter, and at its peak, I think, was presenting 3 or 4 nights a week. The nightly Farage programme had the biggest ratings on GB News, and that is when he started to earn 6-figure serious sums of money for his presenting at that point. But at that same point, he also starts to pick up some side hustles as well. And we know about all this because, of course, a couple of years later in 2024, Nigel Farage does finally become an MP, and all of his finances become public through the Parliamentary Register. So it's not only his GB News salary, he's also got a Cameo, which is normally celebrities or maybe washed up celebrities doing short videos. He earns a terrific amount of money for doing those. But perhaps the most bizarre thing is selling gold bullion, direct gold bullion.
Well, I bet no one ever told you before that you can put gold into your pension, and that it's been producing returns of over 10% a year, year after year after year.
So he builds up this whole second career of outside earnings alongside, of course, his generous salary as a member of parliament. At this point, he's now really quite a wealthy man.
And the cameos, as you say, an unusual move for a politician, but it does land him in trouble.
It does. And some of the cameos, there was one that was infused with language used by the IRA. There was another cameo as well that seemed to refer to drug gangs, I believe, at that point. So they're quite unedifying, you might say. Nigel Farage did a lot of them from his home during the pandemic, and you could see them in his home at that point. And I think John Bercow, the former Speaker of the House of Commons, is the only other mainstream politician to engage in this, but it's clearly been a very lucrative side hustle for him.
Seb, as you said, it was when we sort of started to see his parliamentary interests, the money he declared, that we started to see some of the side hustles. What's even more interesting is the stuff that wasn't declared. Tell us about the £5 million donation, which has really got him in hot water now.
So this is a man called Christopher Harborne, who is a crypto tycoon, I believe you're supposed to say. And he has been a long-time backer of various right-wing causes. He gave money, I believe, to the Conservative Party. But in the run-up to the 2024 election, it's been revealed that Christopher Harborne gave Nigel Farage £5 million. Now, that is not a donation to UKIP or the Brexit Party or Reform Party. It's to Nigel Farage personally. And this was not declared. Now, some people would say Nigel Farage was a private individual. Whoever gives him money is their business. But a new rule came in, said that any member of Parliament has to declare their income the year before they become an MP. Ironically, a European directive that meant this has to happen. And Nigel Farage did not declare this £5 million. It was reported by The Guardian. And that has landed into his second investigation by the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner on whether he broke parliamentary rules. And there's been a lot of questions on why was this money given, what was it meant to be used for, and how it's being spent. And the answer is Nigel Farage has given a whole bunch of different answers to this. Sometimes he said it's for security. He's also said he could spend it on whatever he likes.
It's an unconditional gift. I can spend it on Ferraris if I want. That'd be entirely up to me,
as he told Nick Ferrari of LBC. And essentially he said it's none of the public's business, but it is the business of the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner.
And that's why he's coming a cropper, because there is an investigation into this now, because it wasn't declared and it fell into that period of a year before he came to power. And presumably that rule is because people want to know what might be influencing the decisions of our politicians, which seems fair. You described his reaction, which has been interesting. He seemed to go into hiding for a while. He seemed, for once, to be reluctant to be all over the media. Just describe that sort of period of self-exile and how he's come out of it, because this does feel like a very new Nigel Farage.
So Nigel Farage has been omnipresent in our politics essentially since the 2024 general election and the rapid rise of reform. And obviously the party has won several by-elections. It had an amazing result in May's local council elections where it completely wiped out Labour in big parts of their traditional heartlands. But Nigel Farage has sort of disappeared because he doesn't want to answer questions about this £5 million donation. And he stopped doing press conferences. He used to do quite regular, almost weekly at times, press conferences. Again, another ode political intervention he's brought back. And instead just does pieces to cameras where he's not asked these questions. But he did do a broadcast round very recently, and he came across incredibly badly, I would say, throughout this long 15-year period from 2011 onwards of following Nigel Farage. It is the tetchiest and the most on the ropes I've ever seen him, because he clearly knows that he's messed up here. And people I've spoken to who've talked to Nigel Farage in private about that, he has told them he realises he has messed up, because the £5 million, it's an enormous sum of money, particularly in the land of British politics, where compared to, say, America, donations tend to be much smaller than that. And I think for the first time, it is challenging his man of the people shtick. And you mentioned, Manveen, this point that, he is the Dulwich educated city trader who comes across the man of people. That's always been the paradox of Nigel Farage. But for some reason, this £5 million seems to have cut through that and caused him real damage to his reputation. And when he did those interview rounds, he didn't want to answer questions about it, and he was pulled apart. The most interesting one was on the BBC breakfast sofa, which is normally for politicians. It's the place you want to be because you get to speak to Middle England. And the BBC presenter, Sally Nugent, forensically pulled him apart, and I think he came across terribly.
So, Mr. Farage, how much of that money have you spent?
Look, it's literally none of your business. If I've given it to charity, but the truth is, I haven't. I know what it's
You
there
haven't
for.
spent any of it?
It's none of your business. It's literally none of your... How much of your salary do you spend on beer, on petrol? It's none of your business.
I think it is the public's business to know.
No, it's not
what,
the public's business.
Well, it's being investigated by the Parliamentary Standards Committee, so it's somebody's business.
Let
You're
them
saying you need
investigate it.
security, a legitimate point. How much of that money have you spent on security so far?
I'm sorry. I know I'm not going to answer that deliberately, willfully.
And we should say Nigel Farage has denied any wrongdoing in relation to not declaring his £5 million gift from Christopher Harborne. He said, and I quote, "The rules are very clear. There is no obligation to declare something that is an unconditional, non-political, personal gift. The Parliamentary Standards inquiry into this is yet to deliver its verdict." Coming up, the scandals keep mounting. We'll be back in just a moment. Sebastian, you've been describing how this £5 million donation from a crypto tycoon, as we must call them, has really rattled both Nigel Farage but also some of his supporters who don't quite know what to make of this. On top of that come a succession of headlines about his other personal finances. So let's begin with his property portfolio. Just describe it for us.
So going back again to 2017 when Nigel Farage called himself skint, he has now amassed 5 properties. And as the Times has revealed this week, there is his 2017 village property, which was owned with his second wife, Kirsten Farage, but it's now occupied by his daughter. That is well known about. But then you've also got a beachfront property that was purchased in 2020 for £500,000. And that was under Thorn-in-the-Side Limited, which is one of Nigel Farage's media companies, which overlooks the beach. But then you've also got a beachfront renovation project that was purchased in 2023, again, by Thorn-in-the-Side Limited, and it's been given planning permission for a £1 million demolition and luxury 3-storey build. Then you've also got, in May 2024, a Surrey Woodland Lodge that's Grade 2 listed, 7.5 acres, that was purchased for £1.4 million in cash, with another £350,000 spent on extensions. And then finally, in November 2024, there was an Essex property, which is a 4-bedroom detached house with a heated pool, that was purchased for $885,000 by Laurie Farage, who is Nigel Farage's partner, I believe. Now, he claims that is his Clacton constituency residency. Now, once again, Nigel Farage denies any wrongdoing. It's his money, can spend as it wish, but not all of these properties have been declared to the parliamentary standards. Now, Nigel Farage says because some of these were purchased by his companies, they don't need to be out there. But once again, this is a sign of how wealthy Nigel Farage has become from 2017 until now.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, it's a sign of how wealthy he's become because, you know, as you said, many of those properties, they're not mortgaged. These are being paid for outright, which is surprising to most people. It again just raises that slight sense that he's not being entirely transparent. I mean, has he done anything wrong? Will there be implications? Or is it just that it just raises more question marks?
This one is about question marks because, again, you don't have to declare absolutely everything you've got in terms to Parliament. It's about your income. And some MPs are more transparent than others when they come to it, and realising that it's quite bad for their reputation. But on the property front, I think the question people will be saying is, how did he afford all of them?
Another revelation this week has been about his role as an ambassador for gold bullion. Tell us about that and why it's proving to be so controversial.
So as well as crypto, Nigel Farage loves gold and has done for quite a long time. And he has become a brand ambassador for Direct Gold Bullion, which is essentially doing social media and TV adverts praising gold bullion.
Why choose Direct Bullion? Well, I've decided this is the right company to be with. Why? Well, there are 4 key reasons.
And it emerged this week that he's been paid £270,000 for 12 hours of work promoting this gold dealer. That's double what he was paid last year. And it is £22,500 an hour. That is a lot of money for gold bullion. And once again, there's no suggestion he has done any wrong by he's been fully declared. It's in the parliamentary rules. But it's a judgment question. Is this what MPs should be doing? Advocating selling products, essentially.
And that raises many questions. One will be, is there a conflict of interest?
Well, Nigel Farage, of course, is a backbench MP. He's not a minister, he's not in government, and he's not in a position to change policy towards crypto or gold bullion, in fact. But of course, all this comes to the fact that reform has been ahead in the polls for a long time now, and everything Nigel Farage is done through the lens of a potential future Prime Minister. So there are questions right now in terms of what he is advocating, what that could mean if there is a reform government.
And the sort of sums we're talking about, £270,000 for about 12 hours work, that will be difficult when you're telling nurses and school teachers and people who earn a fraction of that in a year that they can't have any more.
Well, since the last election, Nigel Farage has made £1.3 million, and that makes him the second highest earning MP behind Rishi Sunak, who has a very well-remunerated role at Goldman Sachs, Microsoft and Anthropic, of which Rishi Sunak donates a lot of that to charity. So there's a big difference between that and what Nigel Farage is doing. And I think this is starting to raise a question, about, is this really the anti-establishment tribune that he has set to be in the past? Now, if he was to become a minister in a future government or even prime minister, it will be a question of, does he continue this or does he not continue this? So far, he said it's none of people's business about how he earns his money and what he does with it. But it is starting to challenge people, and we saw that in the recent Makerfield by-election. And I've spoken to some pollsters who did focus groups. It was a very focus group constituency, given the focus on Andy Burnham there. And they said that this stuff has started to come up for people. It has started to cut through in a sense of, why is he doing this? Why is he earning so much outside money?
And then, Seb, you mentioned crypto. We haven't talked about crypto yet. Just explain Nigel Farage's ties with the crypto world.
So it's not just the donation that we talked about from Christopher Harborne. He's also been involved in a crypto startup with Kwasi Kwarteng, the former Conservative Chancellor.
And what do we know about that?
Well, I can't confess to be a crypto expert, but it is a company that is set to make a lot of money if there were changes in crypto legislation to liberalise some of the restrictions around it. And this is fascinating because if Nigel Farage was to be Prime Minister and was to loosen regulations around crypto, it could benefit him personally on that front. And I don't think there's any precedent on that of someone being paid in advance of being a minister for something they've spoken about. And Nigel Farage really believes in crypto, Manveen. This is not just an idea to earn money. He gave a speech where he talked about crypto being the Big Bang 2.0 and has criticised the Treasury and the Bank of England for being too slow on crypto regulation.
There's a global boom in the trade in digital assets, in the use of stable coins, in the usage and investment in all forms of cryptocurrency. We've literally turned our backs on it, both the Bank of England and the FCA being guilty of this.
So it is clear it is something he really believes in, which is something he shares with Donald Trump world, that Nigel Farage, of course, spends a lot of time in America, very close to the US president and those around him, and they are crypto bugs as well. They believe in it, and so does he.
You mentioned the pollsters in Makerfield who said it was coming up increasingly. How do reform supporters feel about this series of scandals?
All this has chimed with the rise of Restore Britain. Now, Restore Britain is another populist party, more to the right of Reform UK, set up by a former Reform MP, Rupert Lowe.
I am now launching Restore Britain as a national political party. I'm now going to dedicate my life to finding, organising, funding and providing hundreds of qualified candidates to present to the British people at the next general election.
And Rupert Lowe was kicked out of Reform after falling out with Zia Youssef, Reform's Home Affairs spokesperson, and Mr Farage. And he has started this party that has gained huge traction online thanks to the support of Elon Musk, who has promoted Restore content, and Mr Lowe personally. And in the Makerfield by-election, Restore polled 8%. Now, some people say that's not a lot, but that 8% could have made all the difference when it came to Labour's vote. Now, in the case of Andy Burnham, his popularity was so great, it wouldn't have made a difference. But there will be scores of constituencies at the next election where if Restore Britain runs, it could cause Reform a real problem. And I spoke to Lucrative from the More in Common think tank, and he said that in focus groups, those Reform voters who are flirting with Restore had said that Nigel Farage was not seen as the new anti-establishment figure. That was Rupert Lowe, and that was Restore. And I think another poster I spoke to, Scarlett Maguire of Merlin Strategies, she has said that in some ways Rupert Lowe is seen as less risky than Nigel Farage, as less because of his manner, and he's got a kind of slightly traditional, old-fashioned Tory view to him and is a bit less tetchy than Nigel Farage. But again, Rupert Lowe has shied away from a lot of interviews in the mainstream, preferring to do social media. But I think if that was replicated elsewhere, it would be a real problem for Mr Farage.
And, you know, he does feel Restore at his heels. They're biting away at his support. In terms of what happens next, I mean, just talk us through the potential scenarios, because there is this parliamentary investigation into that £5 million donation. How might all of this play out?
So that inquiry is set to wrap up imminently. We don't know what that means, but one would have to think it's before summer recess in a couple of weeks' time. And if the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner finds Nigel Farage has broken the rules, again, Mr Farage denies any wrongdoing, but that donation was not declared, so it'll be interesting to see how those two things reconcile. But if the Standards Commissioner finds that he has broken rules, he could recommend sanctions, and those sanctions can include a suspension from the House of Commons. If that suspension is 10 days or more, then Nigel Farage can face what's called a recall petition. So that means if 10% of his constituents sign a petition, then that prompts a by-election. Now, given that there is more than 10% of Lib Dem, Labour and Conservative voters, you would have to think that there would be a by-election in that case. Nigel Farage, it's been reported, is now worried about a by-election. And before the rise of Restore, you would have said he will walk a by-election and he will say, this is the establishment out to get me, vote me back in, and I'm going to take them on because I hate them just as much as you do. But the thing is, he's now not the new game in town. And Clacton-on-Sea is a place where Restore will do very well. And Nigel Farage's majority was about 8,000 or so at the last election. That's pretty substantial. But once again, if Restore run and if they take away that vote, and they will say, no, this is not the establishment, this is you, Nigel Farage, because Rupert Lowe's antipathy towards Mr Farage is personal and it is passionate. And they would put that front and centre. So I still think it will be difficult, but you'd have to bet Nigel Farage would win that by-election, but even the process of that will continue to take some of the shine off him.
If there isn't a suspension, or if the suspension isn't 10 days and there isn't sort of any option of a recall, there are other scenarios where this could be a worry for him. His party will be feeling the fact that he's losing his shine. They'll be feeling the fact that they're losing momentum. He's been in hiding for a while. When he is doing media appearances, they're not going very well. He does have a history of falling out with the parties he tends to lead. I mean, you followed him for 15 years. You'll know how often that seems to happen. Could that be a problem for him?
When Nigel Farage ran UKIP, he became incredibly frustrated at the democratic structures as they were within the party and having to be accountable to a chairman and a board, and he found it very frustrating. When he started the Brexit Party that then became Reform, it was ran as a company and he was the sole company director, and that's a very good insurance policy in case anyone wants to challenge you. That has actually now changed, and there is an element that Nigel Farage could be ousted. Now, I think that is unlikely because Reform is Nigel Farage, and Nigel Farage is Reform. He is the party as far as most people are concerned. But you've seen people around him being ever so slightly critical, which, to look back through his past, is a very dangerous thing for Nigel Farage because he does not take criticism well. Robert Jenrick, who was, of course, recently a Conservative shadow cabinet minister and MP and leadership contender, defected to Reform, and he has said some ever so slightly critical things about the donation. The much more interesting one was David Bull, who was chair of Reform until very recently, and he said Nigel Farage needs to take a break. Now, he's insisted he just meant a summer holiday. But again, that has been seen, I think correctly, as a sign that they're starting to get a sense that he is tired out and he's not up for the fight ahead to become Prime Minister. And whenever he's asked by this, he doesn't just give a clear yes. If you asked Kemi Badenoch or Andy Burnham or even Ed Davey, they would say, yes, of course, I want to be Prime Minister. I want to lead the country. Nigel Farage ever so slightly hesitates, and there is that feeling within Reform that this, for the first time, he might not lead the party into the next election.
That was Sebastian Payne, columnist at The Times. Do you think Nigel Farage's finances will damage his political ambitions? We'd love to hear your thoughts, so do drop us a line at thestory@thetimes.com. The producers today were David Whitty and Sophie McNulty. The executive producer was Edward Drummond. And sound design and theme composition were by Mal Lassetto. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.